The Warzone had devoured fleets older than human civilization. Its gravity tides twisted sensor math, its radiation storms peeled shields like skin, and its ruins were the graves of empires that once believed themselves eternal. When the human fleet translated in, every hostile array locked onto them at once. To the watchers waiting in the dark, the newcomers looked small, late, and badly prepared. Their ships carried none of the ornate hull geometries associated with veteran powers. No ceremonial formations. No intimidation displays. Just tight vectors and disciplined silence. The enemy command observed with detached amusement. Humans were recent entrants to interstellar conflict, known more for stubborn diplomacy and reckless exploration than for surviving wars of annihilation. Their records showed improvisation, not mastery. Curiosity, not dominance. The coalition fleets surrounding the zone had perfected one doctrine across thousands of campaigns: overwhelm, test, erase. They initiated the opening probe without ceremony. The first strike wasn't meant to kill. It was a pressure wave tuned to expose shield harmonics, a diagnostic blow refined over centuries. The moment it hit, human defenses flared, then failed. Not gradually. Not under strain. They collapsed outright, vanishing in a single synchronized drop across the entire fleet. Energy readings plunged to zero. Hulls were naked. Drives flickered. For a fraction of a second, even the enemy command fell silent. Then came laughter. Analysts flagged the outcome as immediate disqualification. A fleet that couldn't maintain baseline shielding in this warzone wouldn't last long enough to be a threat. Surrender protocols were prepared. Some commanders argued to end it cleanly, to spare munitions and time. Others preferred to watch a little longer. The humans didn't retreat. They didn't scatter. They didn't broadcast distress or pleas. They kept moving forward, steady as if nothing had gone wrong. Another wave struck, stronger this time. Hull plating scorched. External modules tore away and spiraled into the void. Several human ships lost maneuvering control and drifted, tumbling through debris and radiation. Enemy tacticians marked them as kills. Still, no response. No counterfire. No visible repair efforts. The humans advanced deeper into the zone, straight toward the densest concentration of hostile fire. Mockery filled the command channels. The conclusion was obvious. Panic had broken human coordination. Their famed adaptability had failed them when doctrine was required. Shields weren't luxuries here. They were survival. The coalition broadcast surrender demands in half a dozen translated languages, offering captivity in exchange for immediate disarmament. The message echoed across human channels and was met with nothing but static. As the distance closed, the enemy escalated. Full-spectrum bombardment followed, a barrage meant to shatter morale as much as metal. The warzone lit up with impacts. Human hulls glowed, cracked, vented atmosphere in brief silver plumes. Sensors confirmed life signs dropping on several vessels. To the coalition, it was already decided. The humans had brought courage where preparation was required, conviction where experience mattered. Yet something felt wrong. The human formation never broke. Damaged ships adjusted vectors to maintain spacing. Wreckage drifted, but the fleet's core remained aligned, advancing with measured precision. Energy readings across their systems were erratic, not depleted. Power wasn't gone, it was being rerouted, suppressed, folded inward. The shield collapse had been too uniform, too clean. No cascade failures. No frantic recovery attempts. An enemy analyst flagged the anomaly and was ignored. From the outside, it looked like humiliation. A young species walking naked into a killing field, stripped of its defenses in seconds, stubbornly refusing to accept reality. To the coalition, this was proof of superiority, confirmation of every assumption they held about humanity's limits. The warzone had claimed another would-be challenger, and the enemy prepared to finish the execution. They did not yet understand that humans did not measure survival the same way. They did not yet understand that what looked like failure was simply the opening move, and that the most dangerous moment in any war was not when a human shield collapsed, but when humans stopped pretending it mattered. Enemy command shifted from amusement to routine analysis. The human fleet was marked as crippled but not destroyed, an oddity that warranted explanation only because it delayed the schedule. Tactical processors replayed the shield collapse frame by frame, searching for the expected signatures of overload, phase instability, or power starvation. None appeared. The defenses had not failed under pressure. They had disengaged with precision, dropping in perfect unison as if obeying a single internal command. That detail was logged, then deprioritized. Doctrine dictated that a fleet without shields was a fleet already dead. The coalition had never faced a species that willingly fought exposed. Their wars were built on redundancy, layered protection, and reverence for systems proven across eras. Retreat was the correct response. The humans advanced instead. That contradiction unsettled a few junior analysts, but senior commanders dismissed it as desperation masquerading as resolve. Weapons fire intensified. Energy lances cut through open space, and kinetic salvos shredded anything slow enough to catch. Several human ships vanished in brief flashes of light, their signatures collapsing into debris clouds. Each loss was catalogued. Each confirmed the prevailing assumption. Still, the formation adjusted, closing ranks without hesitation, compensating for losses with calculated vector changes that suggested planning rather than panic. The Warzone itself began to interfere with coalition sensors as the humans moved deeper. Radiation noise spiked. Gravitational shear distorted targeting solutions. These conditions were familiar to the enemy, but the human fleet appeared to exploit them, using the turbulence to mask internal activity. Power fluctuations rippled through their vessels, not erratically, but in patterned surges that did not match any known repair cycle. An intelligence officer noted that human reactors were running hotter than expected for ships supposedly on the brink of destruction. Heat without output made no sense. The report was flagged as inconclusive. Surrender demands were rebroadcast, this time with harsher terms. Silence answered again. Instead of slowing, the human fleet accelerated, engines flaring brighter, pushing into a region even veteran commanders avoided until enemy resistance had been softened. That decision forced a reevaluation. No rational fleet would enter that zone without shields. No rational species would trade survival for proximity. The coalition debated escalation thresholds. Some argued to annihilate the humans immediately and be done with it. Others wanted to observe. There was value in understanding how a species failed. The delay lasted seconds. In those seconds, enemy targeting systems began to misbehave. Firing solutions required constant recalibration. Lock times stretched longer than acceptable margins. It was subtle, easily attributed to the Warzone's interference. But the interference was directional. Human ships were not merely enduring the environment, they were synchronizing with it. Their trajectories aligned with gravitational distortions in ways that reduced exposure, slipping through gaps predicted only moments before impact. Without shields, they should have been torn apart. Instead, they moved as if the chaos itself were providing cover. A senior tactician finally ordered a deeper scan, overriding protocol. The results were unsettling. The energy once allocated to shields had not vanished. It had been redistributed across internal systems, woven into sensor arrays, guidance algorithms, and computational cores. The humans had sacrificed passive defense to amplify perception and control. They were seeing more, reacting faster, thinking at a scale the coalition did not expect from an exposed fleet. The realization spread unevenly. Some dismissed it as overanalysis. Others felt the first stirrings of unease. A species that treated shields as optional was not playing by familiar rules. The humans were not absorbing damage. They were trading protection for understanding, betting everything on speed, precision, and timing. By the time enemy command recognized that the shield collapse had been deliberate, the human fleet had crossed a threshold the coalition had assumed unreachable. What had looked like incompetence now resembled confidence. What had seemed like a mistake began to feel like bait. The war was no longer unfolding according to expectation. And for the first time since the opening strike, the enemy command considered a possibility their doctrine had never required them to face: that the humans were not losing control of the battle, but narrowing it, compressing the chaos into something they alone could navigate. The shift happened without warning. One moment, the human fleet was an exposed advance force pressing into hostile fire. The next, enemy instruments screamed contradictions. Targeting grids lost coherence as if space itself had slipped alignment. Weapons charged but failed to discharge on command. Guidance systems corrected for errors that no longer existed, overcompensating until shots curved wide or detonated harmlessly into nothing. Then the humans acted. Across the fleet, power surged outward in a pattern too fast for enemy processors to parse. The energy that had vanished with the shields returned, not as barriers, but as structured fields threaded through space itself. They didn't form domes or walls. They inverted local physics, bending trajectories, collapsing probabilities, turning every hostile vector into an unstable variable. Enemy fire didn't strike the human ships. It unraveled before it reached them. Coalition command scrambled to regain control. Orders overlapped. Countermeasures were deployed blindly. Nothing worked. The humans weren't blocking attacks, they were denying the conditions that made attacks meaningful. Sensors showed the impossible, weapons striking perfect solutions that no longer existed by the time the trigger completed its cycle. Human ships accelerated again, but now the movement had purpose the enemy could feel. They weren't advancing as a fleet, they were converging as a system. Data flowed between vessels at speeds that exceeded coalition encryption limits. Every maneuver, every micro-adjustment fed a shared awareness that spanned light seconds. The Warzone's chaos was no longer an obstacle. It had become an extension of human control. The first enemy capital ship went dark without an explosion. Its reactors shut down simultaneously, safety protocols overridden by false environmental inputs its systems accepted as real. Moments later, two more followed, their crews alive but blind, trapped inside vessels that no longer obeyed them. Panic rippled through the formation. This was not an attack profile stored in any archive. The humans fired at last. Their weapons were precise, restrained, and devastating. No wasted salvos. No displays of excess force. They struck command nodes, sensor relays, communication spines. Entire wings of enemy craft lost coordination in seconds, drifting into one another or firing blindly at phantom targets. Automated defenses turned inward, misidentifying friendly signatures as threats. The coalition's greatest strength, interlinked fleets governed by shared doctrine, collapsed into confusion. Commanders demanded explanations that never came. Tactical AIs attempted to adapt and failed, their learning models poisoned by conditions changing faster than correction cycles allowed. The humans were fighting inside the decision loop, not against it. Every response the enemy attempted arrived too late, based on realities that no longer applied. In less than a minute, the battlefield transformed from an execution ground into a controlled collapse. Enemy formations disintegrated under internal contradictions rather than direct fire. Ships disabled themselves trying to compensate for environments the humans had rewritten. What little resistance remained was isolated and neutralized with surgical strikes that left no doubt about intent. Only then did the full implication become clear. The shield collapse had never been a loss of defense. It had been a release. Humans had stripped away protection to remove delay, to expose themselves just long enough to read the battlefield at its rawest level. They had accepted vulnerability as the price of dominance, trusting their ability to adapt faster than any opponent could react. Coalition command finally understood, and the understanding was fatal. The humans had not entered the war zone to endure it. They had entered to master it, to compress its chaos into a weapon no static doctrine could withstand. The moment the shields fell had been the moment the war was decided. By the time the enemy tried to retreat, there was nowhere left to go. Space itself no longer behaved the way they needed it to. The humans had taken control of the minute that mattered, and in that minute, an empire's certainty dissolved into silence. What followed was not a battle but a systemic failure cascading at lethal speed. With command vessels disabled and sensor networks compromised, the coalition fleet lost the cohesion it relied on for survival. Orders arrived fragmented or not at all. Ships hesitated, waiting for confirmations that never came, while human vectors tightened with ruthless efficiency. The Warzone no longer felt chaotic to the humans. It felt quiet, almost cooperative. Enemy captains attempted independent action, breaking formation in hopes of escape. The decision came too late. The humans anticipated divergence before it occurred, adjusting trajectories to intersect future positions rather than current ones. Every attempted withdrawal ran into invisible constraints, regions of space subtly altered to punish predictable motion. Drives overheated, correcting for forces that should not have existed. Navigation systems contradicted one another until crews shut them down entirely, blind and drifting. Communications collapsed next. Coalition fleets depended on constant data exchange, but the human fields distorted transmission timing by fractions of a second, enough to render synchronization impossible. Messages arrived out of order, stripped of context, interpreted as hostile interference. Automated protocols activated failsafes that isolated ships from one another. What had once been a unified armada fractured into thousands of lone vessels, each facing an enemy that still operated as one mind. Human strikes continued, measured and final. They targeted infrastructure rather than hulls, severing the nervous system of the fleet. Power grids failed as false feedback loops convinced reactors they were in critical states. Weapon arrays locked themselves down. Hangar bays sealed with fighters trapped inside. Crews watched their displays with growing horror as systems betrayed them without a single human projectile in sight. The coalition attempted one last escalation. A reserve formation, held back for decisive moments, surged forward with full output. For several heartbeats, it looked promising. Then their lead ships crossed the invisible boundary the humans had prepared. The formation destabilized instantly. Relative positions collapsed. Vessels clipped one another, shields flaring too late, tearing holes through allied hulls. The survivors scattered, no longer a formation but debris with engines. Time compressed. What felt like a prolonged collapse was measured in seconds. Human ships moved through the disintegrating battlefield untouched, selecting targets with calm precision. They did not chase fleeing enemies. They simply removed the ability to flee. One by one, remaining command nodes went dark. The coalition's presence in the Warzone evaporated, not in firestorms, but in quiet disablement. Enemy crews realized the truth too late. This was not annihilation driven by hatred or spectacle. It was efficiency. Humans were not interested in proving superiority through destruction. They were ending resistance as quickly and cleanly as possible, conserving resources, minimizing variables. The Warzone had become a solved problem, and the solution left no room for heroics. In under a minute, it was over. What remained were silent ships, drifting wreckage, and stunned survivors broadcasting fragmented distress calls. The human fleet slowed, systems stabilizing, energy fields retracting as smoothly as they had deployed. No pursuit followed. No victory transmissions echoed through the void. The humans simply moved on, already recalculating trajectories beyond the shattered armada. For the coalition, the lesson was unavoidable. Their strength had been built on permanence, on systems unchanged for ages. The humans had arrived with nothing sacred, nothing fixed, willing to discard defenses, doctrines, even apparent survival itself in exchange for control. Against that mindset, power meant nothing. The Warzone, once a proving ground for empires, had delivered its verdict. The enemy had lasted less than a minute, not because they were weak, but because they were predictable. And humanity had learned long ago that predictability was the most fatal flaw a species could carry into war. Silence reclaimed the Warzone, heavy and absolute. Where coordinated fleets had once asserted dominance, only drifting hulks and fading energy signatures remained. Survivors transmitted warnings on every frequency they could access, their messages stripped of pride, stripped of certainty. They spoke of human ships that fought without shields, of space that turned against its masters, of a battle decided before it was understood. Those signals spread outward, hopping relays, reaching systems far removed from the conflict, and everywhere they arrived, assumptions began to crack. Galactic observers struggled to frame what had happened. There were no images of glorious last stands, no catastrophic detonations to analyze. The data showed something worse: defeat through irrelevance. The coalition had not been overpowered, it had been bypassed. Its weapons, doctrines, and experience had failed to matter. Humanity had not contested superiority. It had rendered superiority obsolete. Within the human fleet, there were no celebrations. Damage reports were compiled. Losses were acknowledged without ceremony. The maneuver had worked, but not without cost, and humans did not mistake success for invulnerability. Adaptation was never complete. It was a process that demanded humility as much as confidence. Orders flowed calmly, directing ships onward, already preparing for environments more hostile than this one. Elsewhere, strategists rewrote threat assessments in a hurry that bordered on panic. Humanity was reclassified again and again, each designation proving insufficient. They were not berserkers, not conquerors, not fragile innovators destined to burn out. They were something more unsettling, a species that treated every rule as temporary, every system as expendable, including their own. They did not defend themselves the way others did. They did not fight to preserve tradition or dominance. They fought to understand, and once they understood, the outcome became inevitable. The Warzone itself bore witness to the shift. For ages, it had punished rigidity and rewarded caution. Now it carried the residue of a different philosophy, one that did not seek to tame chaos or wall it off, but to move with it, to listen, to exploit its patterns in real time. Humanity had not conquered the Warzone. They had collaborated with it, turning unpredictability into an ally. Survivors would later recall a final realization that settled in long after the fighting stopped. The human shields had not collapsed because they were weak. They had been abandoned because they were unnecessary. Humans had accepted exposure to gain speed, vulnerability to gain clarity. Where others layered protection between themselves and reality, humans had stepped closer, trusting their capacity to react faster than danger could manifest. That lesson echoed far beyond the battlefield. Fleets began to question inherited designs. Councils debated whether permanence was a strength or a liability. Younger species listened more closely to human advisors who spoke of flexibility, of planning for failure instead of denying it. The galaxy did not suddenly become human, but it became more cautious, more aware that dominance was not measured in tonnage or age. For humanity, the Warzone was already behind them. Another coordinate awaited, another unknown environment to test against their limits. They carried no myth of invincibility forward, only confirmation of something they had long suspected. Survival did not belong to the strongest or the most advanced. It belonged to those willing to let go of what no longer served them. Long after the debris fields thinned and the last distress calls faded, a simple conclusion spread through military academies and quiet conversations alike. When humans entered a war zone, the most dangerous moment was not when their shields failed. It was when everyone realized the shields had never been the point.